particularly in an age of social media where, as one of my friends says, never judge your insides by someone else's outsides. That capacity of believing in goodness, kindness, love is at the root of all of our great faiths and religions. I always say conviction, not necessarily prediction. We are good and bad, and we have all those downsides within ourselves and certainly among ourselves. Between 2012, when I wrote Why Women Still Can't Have It All, and 2015, when I published the book that grew out of the article but actually was quite different, called Unfinished Business, Women, Men, Work, Family. Many men wrote to me and said, look, I want to go home at 4 o'clock for my kid's baseball game or dance recital or whatever, and I can't. And if I try, not only will I be told that I'm not professional or committed or dedicated, I'll be told I'm less of a man. And just as, women who first went into the workforce were called all sorts of names and that they were too masculine, they had lost their femininity, the deeper issue here is that we have to value care, which is women's traditional work, just as much as we value men's traditional work, which are essential. Fundamentally, it's not about your gender. It's about being whole.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Sincerely Show. I'm your host, Katherine Dudtschak. The Sincerely Show is a place. It's a journey. And it's a movement. A movement towards a way of being that is more sincerely human. A journey through the arc of a human lifetime, the arc of the human condition, where we get to experience sometimes hurt, sometimes hardship, important life lessons, awakening, and lives dedicated to service, to serving others, to serving a more harmonious and sustainable world. And it's a place that's kind, it's a place that's loving, it's a place that's safe and judgment-free. Welcome to The Sincerely Show. Again, I am your host, Katherine Dudtschak, and I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today, Anne-Marie Slaughter. Anne-Marie, welcome to The Sincerely Show.
Katherine, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I love the theme of sincerity. I think so often sincerity is kind of sappy, or at least that's the way it's treated. Actually, it is a way of being fully human and not guarded all the time. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you, Anne-Marie. In the world that we live in, this performative world that we live in, it takes courage to be sincere, for sure. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Why don't we start out and get to know you? Give us all a sense of who Anne-Marie is today, the kinds of things that you're spending your time on, maybe a little bit about you personally and your family. Let's just really sit with your version of who are you today?
When I'm asked that question, I often think about my advice to many of the people that I mentor, and I love to mentor younger people. And I always say, you can look at somebody's CV and it just looks so put together. And you went from this step to this step to this step. And that's not who that person actually is, or almost never. And certainly in my case, I grew up in Virginia. My father was a lawyer in Virginia, sort of deep roots in Virginia and Kentucky and North Carolina. And my mother is Belgian. So I always grew up between two cultures. I always say I'm the result of an international affair. And I always felt in between, different. We were different. We ate different food. My mother had a funny accent. We were half European, and in Virginia in the 60s, that was not common. But I decided early on I was going to.
Did you grow up with sauerkraut?
No. The Belgians, no. But we grew up with what you would now call steak tartare, which in Belgium is called filet américain because it's what the soldiers asked for. They were asking for hamburger, but the Belgians didn't know what that was, so they thought, oh, we'll give them ground steak. Believe me, nobody ate raw beef in the 60s or 70s in Virginia, and we didn't say yes, ma'am, and we didn't drink milk, and it was a very different time. And Charlottesville is now a very sophisticated foodie place, but it wasn't then. But I decided early on that I wanted to do foreign policy sometime in high school, and I decided the way to do that was to go to law school and then go in and out of go to a big New York law firm and work for a partner who would then go to the State Department, and you would go with that partner as a kind of an assistant, and I'd have an in and out career, which was something that was pretty well established, particularly in the American system. Much harder to do in a parliamentary system like Canada. Because you have ministers, but in the U.S., every time you have a new president, he or she can appoint whomever they want. It's got to be confirmed by Congress. But anyway, I had all that mapped out, and all that went very well. And I went to great schools, and I went to Oxford for a master's, and I went to law school, and I worked for that New York firm, and I really hated it. And then there's a whole period of my life that was actually extremely turbulent. I had a marriage that ended. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I ended up a professor and then a dean. And then, in 2009, so roughly 30 years after I graduated from college, I was at a high position in the State Department. So if you look at, if you just look at the CV, you'd say, yeah, well, she set out to do that, and that's what she did. But I got there by a completely different route. And I became a law professor, but because I didn't want to practice law and I couldn't figure out what else to do, and I got very lucky. And then I became a dean at Princeton in what was then the Woodrow Wilson School, which is now the School of Public and International Affairs. And after government, I started running what we call a think and action tank called New America that is in Washington, that is focused on big ideas and bold solutions for the new America, for the country we're becoming. Demographically, we're going to be 50% European American and 50% from all other parts of the globe. We are technologically, we're all changing incredibly fast. And we're a different country in the world, and I say that even before the current administration. So I've had a really interesting career. I'm certainly in it. And there's been a lot of success, and there's been a lot of unexpected twists and turns and reverses, and those are the places you typically learn the most.
Well, we're going to talk about some of those. Thank you for being so open and honest about that, because as you started off with, it's so easy to read your bio online and go, holy crap. Like holy crap. This Anne-Marie is perfection. Idealized perfection of, the perfect, brilliant human being. So let's go back. Let's spend some time talking about childhood and then the journey. And, I was intrigued by, you said you wanted to do foreign policy. So what was it in your childhood? And you said you figured that out by high school. Like, what was it that brought you there? What was it about your childhood or your own essence that was speaking to you back then?
It was a sense of difference always. I mean, my family was just different. I mean, my father had grown up in Charlottesville. My grandfather had been a football coach at UVA and at the University of Virginia and head of intramural. So it's not, we had roots in the town, but my mother was, she'd grown up speaking French. She'd been in Belgium during World War II, had gone to Britain, had just had a very different life. And from an early age, even though we spoke English at home, we would go to Brussels probably every couple of years. And we would stay for about 6 weeks, and we'd go to the beach in Belgium. I mean, you didn't just hop transatlantically. It was a very big deal to get on a plane to fly transatlantically. It was very expensive. And so we didn't do it every year, but we did it every couple. And then when I was 7, I went by myself. I mean, they put me on the plane at Washington, and I was taken off the plane in Brussels. But there, suddenly, I'm in a very completely different world. Everybody speaks French. They eat dinner in the middle of the day with china and crystal and silver and unbelievable food. Those are my early memories. It's like, oh my God, this is a carrot? This can't be a carrot. This tastes like ambrosia, and the chocolates and all of that. But everything's completely different. It's a world that is so far from peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the suburbs as you can imagine. So I was always in between. And I knew that there was this other world that my friends didn't know of. And I knew that I was fascinated with crossing cultures, crossing boundaries, but also that there was a part of me that was alive in Belgium in a way that just wasn't in Virginia. I mean, it was an urban life. My grandfather was a retired surgeon. I mean, they lived a very cultured life in a way that now seems very familiar, but again, long way from Charlottesville in those days. So I would say, and I learned to speak French quite early. And so by the time I got through high school, I don't know how, it's hard to project back. I don't know how intelligent I was talking about foreign policy, but I knew that I wanted to do something in the world of international relations. And as I said, I had looked up, what people at the top of the State Department did and how they got there. And that was my plan. And my college roommate said, I was the most driven, organized, I had my whole career mapped out. And I now tell people, be very careful. It rarely works out that way, and it precludes you're looking at all sorts of other things.
Traveling at 7 years old on your own, and again, I grew up with immigrant parents, and when my relatives would come from Germany to Canada, they would come for 5 or 6 weeks at a time, and they moved in with you. So what kind of parent? Talk about your mom and dad. Give us a little bit of a sense of kind of their psyche. So here you are, living in a home where your mother has fully brought, or at least aspects of her culture with her, and you're growing up with that. You're part of a family where obviously your dad was, incredibly supportive of the idea of you experiencing time in Europe, to the point that your parents allowed you to travel at 7 years old. Like, talk about the blanket that you grow up in, which is ultimately created by our parents. Talk about them and what that nest felt like or looked like.
So my parents are still alive. They're 91 and 94. I'm 67.
Aww.
And I'm still very close to them. And I have 2 brothers, and I'm extremely close. So I'm really, as some of my friends used to say, I won the parent lottery. I mean, no family is perfect ever. But my father had gone to Brussels on a Rotary fellowship after he'd been in the Navy after college. And, he says he walked into this party and looked across the room and saw this absolutely beautiful 22-year-old Belgian woman, and they were engaged 3 months later and married a year later. She had very little idea who she was. I mean, I got married the first time at 23, 24, and the second time at 35. And the idea, of getting married, not just that young, but to somebody who comes from a completely different culture. I mean, my mother had spent a year in Cedar Rapids, Iowa as an American Field Service exchange student when she was her final year in high school. So she had some notion. She spoke good English. She'd been in Britain during the war. But first place, Iowa's a long way from Virginia. And, there she is.
Corn.
Yes,
corn
exactly.
in Iowa.
Corn, drive-ins. She has hilarious stories about, going to a drive-in. And of course, the guy she's with does what you do in a drive-in. And she gets out and runs out of the parking lot because she was wonderfully naive. And so I would say, as I'm thinking about your term nest, it's interesting. It was a loving, strong family nest. At the same time, I was a smart girl at a time and in a culture where that was not okay. I talked too much. I had opinions. I didn't realize it till much later, but I must have scared an awful lot of boys. By the time I graduated from high school, really sometime probably middle of high school, I was very determined that I was going to leave Charlottesville and not come back. And that was not my family. This just is not the place for me. Although my father was really great about encouraging me to have a career, and he did so because in the 60s, there was a huge wave of divorces. Social norms were changing. And my father saw a lot of the marriages of his law partners and others break up. And he saw these women who had put their husbands through law school and med school and whatever else, left high and dry with no way to support themselves, other than alimony. And obviously a lot of the kids were grown. And he decided, I asked him this much, much later, my daughter's not going to ever be in that position. And that seems extraordinary to me. I never knew that. But he always encouraged me to think. He was a lawyer. When I said I wanted to be a lawyer, he was all for it. So I had a lot of support, and I did leave for college. And I haven't ever gone back, although I still have a lot of friends and family there.
You just touched on what my intuition was telling me, is that your dad was and is quite worldly, even back then. Falls in love in Europe.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon in the 50s and 60s to squash out of your female spouse, her identity. And
He didn't.
we're gonna build the house the way I want the family unit to run in order to make him feel comfortable. Whereas what you grew up with was very much opposite to that. He found your mom, fell in love with your mom, and really embraced her and her life and culture, and embraced her roots. So that's what was sitting with me. And then the other is for him to see you and to see other people's families and say, no, my daughter's not going to grow up in that environment. I wouldn't want that for my spouse. I wouldn't want that for my daughter.
Yeah.
So your dad sounds like a really special soul.
Yeah, he is. But just thinking back then, and it's funny, it's not till much later after I started writing on gender and feminism that my two closest friends from Charlottesville, who are still two of my closest friends in the world, said to me, what was it about your dad? Because they had dads, but they were growing up at the same time. Their dads never encouraged them to have careers. So I asked my father, and that's the story he told, and he laughed. He said, I wanted you to have a career. You kind of overdid it. He wasn't imagining that, that would define me. It's hard to describe. I knew one woman lawyer, and Dad encouraged me. I didn't know a single woman doctor, a single woman professor, a single woman engineer, a single woman politician. I try to communicate to younger women today that for all the change we still need to make, we have come a long way. I mean, my kids for a while didn't really realize that there were male doctors. You know, so many of the pediatricians they had were female, and so you know, it's changed a lot.
I have my former spouse is a civil engineer, so I went to banking and worked with women, and she went to work with men as a civil engineer with work
Yep.
boots on. And, you know, two of my children are engineers, and two of them are my two daughters are commerce grads.
Wow.
They're in the corporate
Wow.
world. So,
That's great.
so tell us, before we go forward, tell us a bit about your mom. Let's do your mom some more justice. You obviously got exposure to her culture and her food, but she also seems or feels quite strong to me.
Oh no, you're right. She's an artist. She's a really spectacular artist. She's been painting for 60 years now and has had, you know, a lot of success, and even more importantly, real self-expression. She didn't fully become an artist until I was in college. My younger brother was still at home. But in many ways, she raised us the best, you know, with sort of really strong values and standards. Although my parents' attitude was always do your best. They didn't pressure us. But so she raised us that way, and then we sort of raised her in the sense of we encouraged her to go and make her career. Again, more the elder of my two brothers, who's only 3 years younger than I am. And she often would sort of say, and more as we got older, I grew up in a completely different culture. I have no idea how to guide you in the culture you're in. I'm there for you, and I will tell you what I think. But she understood that, you know, she didn't date. She was. It just was a completely different world, and she had the sense to understand that the best she could do was to give us a strong inner direction. My father too, and then let us find our way. And she's a very special person. She has a strong childlike dimension. And Baudelaire said that genius is nothing more or less than childhood remembered at will. And I think that's really right. It's the ability to retain that sense of wonder in the world and to not put everything through filters. So in a way, it's unmediated sincerity.
Or maybe it's mediated sincerity.
Yeah, I'd have to think.
Depends what you mean by mediated. Maybe it's true sincerity.
It's openness to the world. It is
Yeah.
complete openness to the world in ways that can be very painful, right? I mean, many of our filters are to protect ourselves. So she feels very strongly, which can be wonderful when you're on top of the world. It can be less wonderful when those are really painful feelings. And she takes in the world of today very, very directly.
Wow. I'm in awe of both of your parents.
They're pretty great.
And again, to have a parent that's an artist with such a rich European cultural background, to have your father who dedicated life to country and then law, whose own moral compass guided him to the kind of family that would foster you and the kind of growth that you've experienced is really special. On your mom, this inner direction, there's a moral compass that every soul carries.
There is.
That's grounded in love. And I've studied this, I've read it, and I believe it to be true. If we can live in awe and wonder, you know, that's the root of all beauty, is to be able to live in awe and wonder, and to have a mother that lives from that place is, I think, really special. There's a line that I read recently, something to the effect of absolute wisdom is grounded in
Ah,
innocence.
what a lovely, lovely thought.
Because we don't know. You know, we other than our moral compass and the ability to slow down and tune into not our head,
But our heart.
but our heart and our belly, the other two brains in our body, which is where consciousness lives. You know, that ability to live from that inner direction or compass that your mom taught, I think is pretty special. My mother, just for fun, because my mother had to grow up at 8 years
Yeah.
old. Her father was shot at 8 years old. The war had hit, and my grandmother was not well. And so she had to care for her little sister, 6 years
Yeah.
younger, at
Yeah.
8 years old. And my mother used to say to me, she's gone, she'd be about 92 now. She would say, Katie, you make your bed, you sleep in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, what you really have is your moral compass. Not your ego,
No,
but a deeper moral
a
compass within
deeper.
you. Yeah. And then she used to say at about 13 years old, I've taught you everything I know.
So
Again, they're immigrants to Canada. I've taught you everything I know. You know, the rest is up
that's
to
right.
you.
That's right. I think.
At 13, you can relate.
Yeah, and I think that is a common immigrant experience, but even more, I think, for parents as ours did who went through the war. I mean, my mother did not lose her parents, but she was, put in a boarding school at the countryside in Britain alone. Nobody speaking her language, having refugeed with her mother and brother. I mean, the trauma of separation and fear and all of that so many of those parents and again, my family got off relatively easily, certainly in comparison to most, but and then to come to a completely different culture, I think it's not surprising that they give you everything they can, and then they say the rest is up to you. But that ability to teach you to be able to see things. I mean, on my mom's 90th birthday, every single grandchild and child said basically the same thing to her, which was, you have enabled me to see beauty in many unexpected places, not the places that are classically beautiful, but to look at a reflection in a puddle or a patina on a light pole or a configuration of grates in a sidewalk and see beauty. And that is a tremendous gift.
One of my spiritual teachers says, we can live from arrogance, which is to judge, or we can live from elegance. And what you just described, that ability to be so present and in awe of the creative energy and essence of anything, is your mother, and that's living from elegance.
I love that, arrogance to elegance. No, it's true.
And in order to live from elegance, you need to slow yourself down enough to be able to observe. So the gift of a creative mother is really special. I will share with you, before I dig in a bit deeper with you, I just did a pilgrimage. My mother and father both had to flee their childhood villages where they were born. 3 of my grandparents died during the war, and my grandmother was injured during an air raid and was never able to leave. She wanted to leave to go to Sweden or Denmark. And I told her story in my first book, Sincerely Katherine, of the war and their childhood, where they grew up. And so I just got back from a solo pilgrimage to the birthplace of my mother and father.
In what country?
In Poland. Poland for my mother, which was called Prussia at the time, and the Czech Republic, or Chechnya, which is Bohemia, which was called Sudetenland at the time.
Yeah. Wow.
So I walked the villages of my mother and father, and I spoke to their souls as I walked through their villages and said, "We're home. I brought you home. I brought you home to the place that you and your parents had to flee, during the atrocities of war." And I cried with them as I walked their little humble villages. And, I feel like I've completed a 2/3 generational healing arc.
That's beautiful.
At a time in human history where it would appear that we've gone back to war, which we'll talk a bit more about later. So let's take life forward. You talked about the twists and the turns, and you talked about some of the the upsets, that this perfectly laid out plan didn't play out the way you wanted. Are there a couple of jarring moments in your life that represented kind of shock and awakening for you that you're comfortable sharing, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, and I will also just say that just like individual CVs don't tell the whole story, my account of my parents and my family is all true, and there are other truths too, right? It's never,
No.
there's always turbulence, and I always think that when we see holiday cards, and only the best side is shown. There's plenty of pain.
Thank you for saying
Pain
that.
and
There was
anger.
a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma in my house.
Exactly.
So
And I think that's important, particularly in an age of social media where, as one of my friends says, and she's very wise, she says, never judge your insides by someone else's outsides. And so never judge how you feel inside by all those gorgeous pictures of everybody else's outsides. I think it's very wise. So moments. I mean, there are many. I'll just give a couple. It may not sound traumatic to realize
Doesn't need
that
to.
you don't want to practice in a big law firm, but for me, I was so self-directed, and it was all mapped out, and I had this plan, and I realized in the mid-'80s, I got a summer internship in the firm I wanted to work in, and I came out of it and thought, I can't do that. I felt fungible. I didn't like the work. I'm fungible with all the other associates. And I realized I'm not going to make myself do this. In fact, I'll be bad at it, but that's what everybody expected. And that's what I said I was going to do. That's what all my friends went off to do. And I found myself drifting, really drifting. I didn't, and I always say I quit smoking, my marriage broke up, my career took a different turn. I don't know what the causality was and all of that, but it was a very, very uncertain.
It was written in the stars,
maybe,
Anne-Marie.
maybe.
I'm pretty certain.
But, it was I just had to drift, and I got a fellowship. I re-enrolled in a PhD program because I didn't know what else to do, but I didn't want to teach. I didn't have an idea. And that process for someone who had been so directed was painful. And, when people asked me what I was doing, I had like a 20-minute answer because I was doing a little of this and a little of that. I had to support myself. I was married. But I came out of it knowing a couple things. One, okay, so, things fall apart and you can support yourself. And again, I had plenty of advantages, but I basically just scrambled and figured out how to do things. And that process held the door open for things that I'd never considered. I'd never considered being a professor. In fact, I would have said, no, I don't want to be a professor. I'm a person of action. I didn't have academics in my family. But over 3 or 4 years of hanging out with professors, particularly my mentor, a wonderful law professor, and kind of living his life vicariously, I realized I loved law. I didn't love practicing it, but I sure loved teaching it. And that I really am a person who thrives in the world of ideas, which didn't surprise the people at the law firm said I wasn't coming to. They said they thought that was pretty evident, but it wasn't evident to me. So that's the first is, the end. This is like between 26 and 32, roughly, that period. And then suddenly everything comes together. I get a law teaching job. The man I've been pursuing for some time finally sees the light and falls back in love with me, or falls in love with me, not back. And we got married. And we're still married 33 years later. And we...
You pursued him, Anne Marie. You pursued him.
I absolutely pursued him. He was. I knew. I'd known him while I was married, but after the marriage really was cracking up, I went to Paris. My ex-husband and I were supposed to stay with him, and I took it was like a bolt of lightning. I knew him, but suddenly I saw him in a really different light, and he was used to having girls fall in love with him. It took him a while to realize that. And I wasn't about to be jerked around, so I broke up with him pretty quickly. And then we stayed friends. And at some point, I just said, I'm not going to keep pursuing you. This is your loss if you can't see this. And to his great credit, he I don't know what he did, but he changed. And so everything came together. And there's a long period in there where things came together. I'll say two other things about real moments. One is, now if you wake me up in the middle of the night and say, who are you? What do you do? I'm going to say I'm a leader somewhere in there. That's not going to be the first thing I say. I don't know exactly, but it's going to be up there. I think of myself as a leader. I did not think of myself as a leader till my late 30s. And it was like a Sheryl Sandberg story where it was my husband who said, I was an international lawyer teaching at Harvard, and we were looking for a new president of the American Society of International Law. And I'm talking about it. We're driving somewhere, and my husband says, well, how about you? And I said, oh, no, I couldn't do that. And this is like your classic woman story. And he's like, what do you mean you couldn't do that? You're a tenured professor at Harvard. You could do that. And I did do that. But until that moment, I just didn't. It just didn't occur to me. And I think about that now, and I look at many of the younger women and men I mentor and realize there are lots of leaders in there. They just don't, particularly women, we're encouraged not to put ourselves forward that way, or we used to be, less so now. And some men. So that's no trauma exactly, but a transformation. And then later, when I finally got to the State Department, which I'd always wanted to do, and I got the dream job I'd always wanted to have, and I was commuting from Princeton, leaving at 5 a.m. on Monday and coming back late Friday, two sons. And the eldest, as I've written about, was having a really rocky time. And I suddenly realized that this mantra I not only believed, but had preached to other young women, that you can have it all, do it all, make it work. You just have to be ambitious enough. And I had lots of advantages. I had money. I had a supportive husband. I had all sorts of things, and it was not working. And I wrote this article in the Atlantic called "Why Women Still Can't Have It All." Not saying, again, I don't even use the phrase anymore, but that was a bombshell or a tsunami. And suddenly I thought I'd been a promising rising foreign policy professor. And suddenly I was like this, 4 million people read that article, and it turned my life upside down.
Amazing. I want to go back for a second, unpack a couple of things, and share what lands with me, and hopefully it'll land with guests as well. The word fungible, you said a few minutes ago.
You have a keen ear.
Yeah, and here I am dyslexic.
Well, maybe that's probably why you have a keen ear.
I language is everything for me because it carries energy. Language is energy. In the end of the day, if human beings didn't need to speak, and if we could actually feel and understand the energy someone's trying to, we could have even richer
Agreed.
experiences.
Agreed.
I think the word fungible is really cool, because how many young people end up in an internship program and they feel like a widget,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
When you had already had enough life experience with your creative mother and your European background and traveling at 7 years, and your father who's wants you to be fulfilled and your own person. So when I wrote down fungible and I said versus your own
Yes,
person.
exactly.
So there's something in your essence and your lived experience at that point that says, no, this does not align. I'm not a billable hour. I'm not fungible. I'm a whole human being that wants to express themselves. And then you talked about the falling apart. And, you may not call it trauma, but, a marriage, quit smoking, I'm not going to be a lawyer, a practicing lawyer. Like, that's
It was a lot.
It's a lot. But the other word you used was figure it out. In the spiritual community, what that would be called is being in flow.
Oh, interesting.
You're being present and you're just navigating based on what feels right. You actually don't know. Exactly. You're just figuring it out. But what's deeper that figuring out sounds like you're flying by the seat of your pants. No, you're actually learning and navigating and discerning and intuiting real time, in the moment, in present. And then you talked about how the ideas flowed, and then how you ultimately found your way to back to school, to being a professor. And then you talked about, pursuing your husband. The knowing who you are and being your own person had never left. You felt something at your soul level about your husband, and you didn't abandon it. Yet you were still sovereign. You were still your own person and independent and sovereign enough to say to him, either you come on this journey or I move on. But I know this is special.
Yep.
Yes, I know exactly this experience. And then your word on leadership. I think every human being's a leader when you live from your truth. When you find wholeness within, when you find self-love within, when you radiate your own human nature. And it's not perfect. There's highs, there's lows. They never stop. But when you find more of yourself on the inside and you radiate from that truth and essence, you naturally become a leader of others. You become a ray of light in the lives of others. And I also believe the word leadership is a word that is earned and given by others, not by self.
Yes.
You can be a manager, you can be a speaker, you can be a CEO, but it's really the world around you that decides whether you're a true leader for this world and for humanity or not. And I think there's no question, Anne-Marie, that you're a leader. You've changed lives in beyond material ways, and you've done it by finding, truth within you. And all of that brought you to the courage to write the article. I was having a conversation with my, deep best friend of mine. Our souls we've known each other for 1,000 lifetimes. And I was telling her and her sister about your article, and she's like you, she's brilliant. And I go, why women still can't have it all? And she goes, yes, yes. Finally, somebody's speaking truth. Well, you spoke it a few years ago. But that took leadership. That took an inner truth and a courage that you had found within yourself to write that article. And your book.
Yeah. I laughed that when I published the article, and you have to. This was 2012, June of 2012, and the Atlantic, as they read the drafts, it took 9 months to write. They decided to make it a cover article, and I started getting notes from various editors saying that this really resonated, but the publicity team could not get me booked on shows or radio the week before the issue was coming out, and it's a cover story. And the Atlantic, it wasn't the Atlantic of today, but it was a major cultural force. And the reason was everybody thought, yeah, same old. And I agree with that. That a version of the article I wrote had been written in 1982, 1992, 2002, and now 2012. Like, this is not working. We have got a half-finished revolution, or not even half, maybe a third. And women are now, many of them, doing jobs that men have traditionally done, and they are still doing the jobs that women have traditionally done, and the workplace and our culture and our career paths have not changed enough. And so I did not expect any of what happened. It was like a tsunami hit. And I remember my mother calling up and saying, "What have you done?" And what she meant was, here I was, it was 2012, so I was 54, and I'd spent this whole life, work at teaching, but still doing international relations and international law and being in the State Department. And suddenly, all anybody knows about Anne Marie Slaughter is that she's this woman, she's a feminist, or she's an anti-feminist, that she's fighting Sheryl Sandberg, which wasn't true. And it was just, I'd had no experience in the public eye like that. I was known to a relatively small community of foreign policy people and international lawyers. So I think it just happened to hit a generational moment where a lot of younger women were saying to their mothers and aunts and older sisters, "I don't want your life. I see that you've broken all these barriers, but at tremendous personal cost, and I don't want that. I want to be home with my children." So those women read it as, I am validating their choice. And many of them, including former law students of mine, called and said, I burst into tears when I read your article. I still get people saying that. And from all over the world. I got articles from Burundi and the North Pole, not the North Pole really, but the Arctic, and above the Arctic Circle, and from the Middle East. And so a lot of women felt that. Other women just felt like, as you said, thank God somebody's telling the truth. And I had given a sort of talk about it at Oxford, I guess that spring, to some very, very high-powered women. And when I sort of said, look, this idea that you can just make it happen if you're ambitious enough, or you manage your time well enough, or any of that, it just depends what happens in your life. And there's a tremendous amount you can't control, and the systems will not support you. And she said, thank God you didn't give us another BS, you can have it all talk. So I knew that there was this stuff burbling up. But a lot of women my age and older also thought I betrayed the cause. They thought, we are not far enough along for somebody to say this. And you are just validating what men have always thought, which is women are going to go home to their families. And I wasn't. And, you write words and it gets understood differently. But it catapulted me into a different life. And I don't think I would have gone to New America without it. I know that if I look back, there's just like this fork in the road, whether I intended it or not, and I took a very different path.
Yeah, you found, as I said earlier, you were living it viscerally, that you were not able to be there for your son the way that the inner compass your mother taught you and father taught you was calling you to be. You were not in alignment.
No, that is correct.
And you had built enough self-confidence. You were your own person, and you found the courage to speak truth.
I did. I don't know if I would have if I'd known what was going to happen. I think I would have, but it doesn't matter because I didn't.
You don't get to
I know
know.
you don't get to know.
You
Exactly
don't
right.
get to know. You just, you did it, and it feels pretty divine to me. What what stands out for me, apart from the reaction I had and my friends had, which is, yes, she nailed it, and it's still true.
Still true. Definitely.
Is the conversation that you and I had before our session today, which is, I don't think men can have it all either. And we have been living inside and building as a species a human world that is centered on extraction and performance. Let's extract as many resources, let's extract as much value from resources, including human resources, as absolutely possible to maximize performance, to maximize productivity, to maximize contribution. All things are a root of this system that we've built. And the root of the system, I will go on record, I don't like to call it the patriarchy, because we immediately think men.
It's not.
Or matriarchy, immediately we think women. And an extractive and performative system tends to be more linear, more mechanical in its operating mode. A more regenerative and coherent system is more circular and more balanced in its way of being. And having lived in a man's world and a woman's world, and with neurodiversity and a small humble farm and the top of business, like, the reality is there's masculine and feminine attributes in every human being. And men want to cry. Men want to paint, experience creativity. Men want to be able to open up emotionally with others. So I don't think the system's working for anybody.
I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't. And indeed, between 2012, when I wrote Why Women Still Can't Have It All, and 2015, when I published the book that grew out of the article but actually was quite different, called Unfinished Business: Women, Men, Work, Family, I had thought a great deal about men. Many men wrote to me and said, look, I want to go home at 4 o'clock for my kid's baseball game or dance recital or whatever, and I can't. And if I try, not only will I be told that I'm not professional or committed or dedicated, I'll be told I'm less of a man. And just as, women who first went into the workforce were called all sorts of names and that they were too masculine, they had lost their femininity, men also get attacked for doing any of those things. And I came away thinking, look, the deeper issue here is that we have to value care, which is women's traditional work, just as much as we value men's traditional work, which is more competitive, not always, farming, etc., but both are essential, both meet essential human needs. Whole people, as you said, recognize and feel that full circle of emotions, of needs, of desires, and some are way over, on the caring spectrum, and some more competitive, but fundamentally it's not about your gender. It's about being whole. And so many men have been trapped in gender stereotypes, the way women have felt that we were trapped in gender stereotypes. And in many ways, we need a men's revolution just as much, or not even just as much. That is necessary to complete a women's revolution, because it's a human revolution in how we work and think and relate to one another.
I agree with you more. I'm beginning to work on my third book, and it is the human revolution. Is what I'm, and a pathway to inner coherence and building a world, or evolving to a world that has coherence on the outside.
Absolutely right.
You used the word competitive, and I read this on my travels through Europe. One of my favorite thought leaders is the physicist David Bohm. and he studied alongside
Wow.
Einstein. And one of the things he fostered through research was called the Bohm dialogue, which essentially is in keeping with sharing circles in indigenous communities. That when you actually, and sincerely is founded on this basis, is that when you suspend judgment and you sit in presence and in kindness and in openness and listen to understand, that truth will automatically emerge. And he would bring groups of people together without an agenda, without a moderator, and no one speaks in the beginning. And then eventually somebody speaks, and then a conversation naturally unfolds based on whatever was in the psyche within the room. And then they let the conversation unfold. Every time he did this, every human being left the room more caring, more kind, more empathic, and behaved differently in their lives because they sat in the presence of others without judgment. So that's the root of Bohm dialogue. The other thing that he studied was our agrarian history, and you talked about agriculture. And it was really through our agrarian beginnings when we started to figure out, because we're problem-solving beings, how to produce excess. And as soon as we had excess from one farm versus another farm, the farmer of the excess farm became more valuable. The land became more valuable. And land rights, rule of law, all emerged out of this agrarian cycle. And Bohm described competition as a human mistake. That it's actually not, there's lots of human ingenuity without competition, because there's a fundamental need to survive within any living organism. You didn't need to foster it or inflame it with additional competition. So he described it as a mistake. So I put that out there for people to contemplate. I believe fear and anxiety and survival have a place within the human condition, but in today's world, we live most of our lives in anxiety and fear and survival when it's actually no longer required.
That's really interesting. I have to think about that.
Yeah, me too. So you've prompted it for me. So let's talk about your work today. And let's talk about the state of humanity. So firstly, talk about New America and the kinds of work that you're doing. And let's overlay it for a little bit on top of the world that we're experiencing today. And I talk publicly about what I refer to as the 4 existential crises: social fracture, economic divide, and degradation of planet being the 3 macro forces that are causing a level of disharmony, fear, anxiety within the human condition. Inflamed by the proliferation of information and disinformation as the 4th crisis. And AI is only going to take it further faster, and we already know that. So we're at the root of everything. We're in this period of human history where these existential crises exist, and now we've got war and further fracturing that's occurring. I want to dig into your hope for humanity and your beliefs about the human condition and the work that you're doing at New America.
That's a lot, and it's a lot of
important. We'll do another episode and go deep into it. But
so New America is a organization of extraordinary people who are thinkers and doers. We've got technologists and data scientists and many researchers, many network managers who run networks of organizations that are doing youth apprenticeships and showing new pathways from school to work, or people working with state governments to make policies actually work, to make benefits get to the people that they're supposed to get. But what unites it is we are a group of people who think big. We are thinking about the future of higher education in well before AI. We're certainly thinking about it now, or how do we no longer fund K through 12 schools based on property taxes? We're the only nation in the world who thinks if you live in a richer neighborhood, you should get a much better education than if you live in a poorer one, because that's how we pay for our schools. Or what should how do we get to a real multi-party system in our political system? There's nothing in the Constitution or any of the founding papers about two parties, much less Democrats versus Republicans. And we can get to a much more competitive and healthier system. Or how does technology serve the public good? Or how do we think about the world in a way that includes people and planet and not just states bashing each other to see, who is the biggest and the most dominant? So we are people who think big. We are people who think at the same time, not just about the ideas, which are really important, but how do you turn those ideas into solutions? And then how do you learn from trying? Because you can't come up with a solution only in your head. I mean, you know that. You were in the private sector for a long time. A product is improved by being out there. So we're an unusual organization. And it's really been an honor to be able to work with the people I work with and to try to shape an organization that meets this moment. I mean, of contributing to solving these enormous problems. I'd say I want to talk about one area of our work that's relevant to the economic and social fracturing you talked about, and then I'll move to global affairs. We believe in the value of care. We believe that capitalism and the way it's translated into our national economies is deeply one-sided. It measures only that competitive activity or that individualist activity, how to get richer. It does not measure that part of us that needs belonging, that cares for one another, but we're also cared for, that is really rooted in family, but family either biological or chosen. I mean, there are so many families that are groups of people who've come together to commit to one another. That is a core human need and constellation if we look at our history, and yet we don't measure it. We have no measures for family strength. We have measures for unemployment and the size of our gross national product. So we are thinking about how do you put families, again, broadly defined, at the core of our economic and social policy. And what does that mean for capitalism? What does that mean, as you said, for purely extractive models? How do we become whole? Yes, by recognizing what whole individuals need, and then the economy and society and environment that supports that, and we support it. I mean, the planet is fracturing. Those are really huge ideas, and they can't be tackled that way, at least not in a place that is working specifically on solutions. But those are the beating heart of innovation or pushing boundaries that underlies a lot of our work. And when you then turn to the world, the international relations I was taught and practiced, and the State Department runs on, and foreign ministries run on around the world, is a system that was created between 1648 and 1945, right? It's the world of nation states. Very important after the 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics and all the different subsects. That was the bloodiest war Europe had ever seen. So the idea that nope, you create, your state, and you have your religion and your government, and you can just do that. We're not going to bother you. Was an adaptation to a moment, and nation states have done a lot of good. Right now, they are not meeting the needs. We are destroying our planet, and we are
Mhm.
ignoring the needs of the world's people. Nation states are still really important. I'm not an advocate of getting rid of them, but what we need is an understanding of global politics that starts with people, that includes states. They've got to govern themselves in various ways, but that fundamentally also brings in the planet. And I don't just mean climate change. I mean all the
Me
planetary
too.
forces. And, that's not going to stop the
Yeah.
war in Iran, although I have ideas on that too. But recognizing that the war in Iran is simply killing thousands of innocent people, and that when you do that, you are just creating the next generation of enemies, that'd be important. And more generally, again, we need to remake the existing international order in ways that meet the needs of the people and the planet. That's
That's
a
a lot.
lot. It's a lot of thinking
Um,
over a lot of years.
inspiring. Um, so you talk about a cooperative way of being across departments or entities or
I do.
countries. And, Canada has a prime minister that is on record talking about fracture and on record talking about middle powers. And it's easy to initially think middle powers are individual countries, whereas I didn't hear it that way. I
Oh,
literally immediately where my intuition went to, because I'm a banker,
yeah, yeah.
I'm not a banker, but I spent 40 years being a banker, was what's the collective GDP of the EU plus China, or not China, plus Canada, plus Australia, plus a bit from India. The collective gross domestic product or economic
It's
ability
huge.
is huge. It's bigger than any one of the
Absolutely.
superpowers.
42%.
So it's massive. And so these are democratic countries that appear to be really wanting to uphold international law, the rule of law, human rights, the UN, human goodness, and for the planet. And I'm with you. I don't like the fact that we talk about climate change because the root of the problem is how we care for ourselves and one another as human beings, and how we take care of our home, which is Earth, or live in harmony with our home, which is Earth. So, in your view, do you think we have it in us to come together as a collective of morally aligned, democratically aligned, human rights aligned, dignity aligned organizations and countries, and move with a level of speed and thoughtfulness to rebalance in the wake of authoritarianism and the threats that we face? Or maybe that's a too
No,
black and white of
no.
an answer.
It's,
Maybe.
I think we are highly unlikely to do that without another cataclysm. The League of Nations is born out of the cataclysm of World War I, and the United Nations out of World War II. And a lot of the international law we then built was the Cold War, because we had two nuclear superpowers that could and can blow up the world many times over. I think that we're going to have an AI crisis or like the beginning of Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future, where 20 million Indians die in a heat wave. That's not science fiction. That is projection from existing models. And some combination of crisis, I think, will jolt us to the realization, oh my God, we will all perish unless we find a different way, or at least enough of us. As you said, if you take the EU and Britain and Norway and Switzerland and Canada and Japan and South Korea and Australia, that is 42% of the world's GDP, and that's not even including India or Mexico or Brazil. So the power is there. The ideas are there. That is where Prime Minister Carney was so important because he's shown a spotlight on what a lot of people have been thinking and writing. But the catalyst is unlikely to be, gee, this would be the right thing to do and we should do it, because people are afraid. They're afraid of being punished. They don't know how. I say that to be an American of my generation who is interested in foreign policy is to wake up when there's been a crisis anywhere in the world and think, gee, what are we going to do about it? That is what the State Department thinks. Well, not anymore. But no other country automatically thinks, what are we going to do about it? So you need to build new muscles. And it's very gloomy to say this, but these crises are coming. We've had some where we could be on the brink of another at any moment. A nuclear weapon could be used. There are so many. And one of those is going to be bad enough that people will come to their senses. And at that moment, you have to have ideas that are not just a book, but people talking about them. The Atlantic Charter was created in 1943, and a whole lot of people worked on what the UN Charter was going to look like in those intervening 2 years. So I deeply hope that Canada and other countries will pull together those kinds of working groups now for a middle power order and wait for the moment.
Wow. Very clear.
I'll raise my hand to help, and so will so many others. And you too.
Me too. I'm with you 1,000%. And you talk about fear and anxiety, and 6 months ago, I wouldn't have said 4 existential crises. I literally created a PowerPoint deck 3 years ago that kind of mapped out the 4 existential crises and how they're at the root of the mental health pandemic that we're experiencing in the world, and at the root of fear and anxiety in the world, and the unhealth within the human condition. But I was afraid to say it because I don't want to be a fearmongerer. Yet I think we have to speak truth, just like you did in your article.
Yes.
It's not, the article is no longer why women can't have it all.
humans.
It's why humanity can't have it all.
That's exactly right. And shouldn't try.
And shouldn't, and have it all is an ego.
Yes.
Have it all is in love and peace and harmony with nature, with self, with each other. And what I've learned through my own life story and through talking to others in this Sincerely community, one of them is a future guest of the show who's an expert on mental health, grew up in Auschwitz, does work in the addiction space. And his point to me, he says, Katie, you're not going to solve humanity. And he goes, you'll create rays of light. Yeah. But humanity won't change until a collapse occurs. The system has to break. I prefer to be on the team that is out in front, doing whatever we can to think ahead of what an order, a system could be that is kind, is caring, is true, is whole for all. And I sense, and this is maybe my last question, I sense we come from the same book, which is, I believe in love and I believe in the goodness of humanity.
I would say yes, very much so, and that capacity of believing in goodness, kindness, love is at the root of all of our great faiths and religions. It is an act of faith. I always say conviction, not necessarily prediction, because of course all those other things are true too. We are good and bad, and we have all those downsides within ourselves and certainly among ourselves. But it is the belief that those things will prevail, and they have prevailed in the past, is a deep, deep part of what makes us human. And I would say when we think about the world, we have to bring it back down to exactly where you have brought it back down, which is relationships among individuals. We start there. We start with what we can shape and control. And I love the Sincerely community. I'm so glad that you are doing this.
Well, for my experience, and I talked earlier about 2022 when I really went on my healing journey. I spent a better part of 18 months solo in the wilderness of humanity and the world, grieving and healing and discovering self. It starts with an inner coherence. It starts with refining your soul or your essence or love within and love for self. And then suddenly you have this ability to have empathy for others and be present to others in a way that you didn't before, and you're less judgmental. And then you suddenly find that you walk a bit slower and you have the ability to observe the elegance of nature and creativity in the world. And as we started off this discussion with, it's not without intelligence or courage. Coming from kindness and curiosity and listening and understanding and empathy and, inclusivity in pursuit of a sustainable world takes a lot of intelligence, and it takes a lot of courage to do that. And what I love so much and honor so deeply in you, Anne-Marie, is you were raised in a nest, that in a blanket, in a sincerely blanket that at a very early age fostered heart and mind in you and fostered this belief, this knowing that you can be your own person, Anne-Marie. And many of us take 50 years or a whole lifetime to become our own person.
That's true.
Anne-Marie, your journey to living in alignment with your truth and your essence and your own person, not being fungible,
You're safe.
began quite early. And we're so blessed to have you doing the thinking work and the idea work that you're now doing in the world. And I know our guests, we're honored to have you spend time with us, and I'm honored to get to know you. And I'm excited about the work that we could do together to foster the kind of cooperation, the kind of work that facilitates a way of being together as humans and with our planet that is completely possible and within our grasp. So thank you.
You're so welcome. I look forward to our next conversation, and I look forward to listening to all your other guests. And this has just been a delightful conversation.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you for being here for this conversation. This is exactly why the Sincerely Show exists. To witness real human stories of individuals that have dedicated their life to service and contribution. Stories of people who have walked through darkness and heaviness and found their way back to themselves, to their deeper selves, towards a place that is more whole, and again to a life of service and contribution. My hope is that something in what you just heard helped you feel less alone, more hopeful, and perhaps closer to meaning and purpose in your own life. This is a judgment-free space. If something moved you, inspired you, or sparked a reflection of your own, I would genuinely love to hear it. Share what this conversation opened in your heart. That is the kind of exchange that makes this community, the Sincerely community, what it is. It's what makes Sincerely, genuinely Sincerely. What I ask is that we hold each other with the same love and kindness that brought us here. This is a place of curiosity, not criticism, of witnessing, not judging. If you are sharing, share from your own experience and from a place of love and kindness. That is always enough. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who you'd like to hear it. That is the most generous thing you can do, not just for the show, but for the people in your life who are quietly looking for this, looking to feel less alone, for hope, for meaning, for lessons. And before we close, this conversation is for reflection and perspective only. It should not be relied upon as therapy or professional advice. Please always seek qualified support where needed before making any decisions based on what you heard here today, or heard or observed at Sincerely Overall. This content is also subject to our full terms and conditions, which you can find on our website at sincerelyinc.com. Thank you again for joining the Sincerely Show. Until next time, please take good care. Thank you so much.